Hey everybody, welcome to the Dad Challenge podcast. My name is Josh. I'm actually really exhausted today. Jeff and I were doing another disaster detail, and that's coming out at the end of the week. We're very excited about it. And I did promise you guys I was going to do my ex-pastor story. And I was thinking about it today. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do it today. I'm going to start today. I'm not sure I'm going to tell you the whole story. Maybe we'll Tarantino it and I'll tell you about what's kind of happened recently or not. I don't know. Let's see where it goes. I never know how these videos are going to go, by the way. None of this is scripted, obviously, and some of you hate that. A lot of this stuff just comes right out of my brain, and it's kind of my cross to bear, and sometimes it can be crazy to live around me, I guess, for people like my wife. This is something that's happened to me recently. My whole life has been surrounded by, being a Christian and everything since I was about 12 years old, and so we're going to get right into the story. But first, I want you guys to watch this video with me. This is me. Probably at the height of my prime, I guess. And you'll see my wife in here too. I just wanted to show you what I did for a living, what type of pastor I was. And I want you guys to see it for yourself, okay? So we're going to watch this together. I'm so thankful you guys are here tonight. So how many people in this room have had a bad week? You don't have to put your hand up. You can if you want. How many have had a bad month? How many have had a bad year? Something devastating happened to you. That's my wife right there, by the way, sitting next to me on my right. I mean, think about that for a second. Think about that thing as a wall that's kind of around you that blocks you. You can't get through it, can't get over it. It's just there, and you've asked God a million times, please get rid of this wall. Right? This has happened before in your life, and God did it, right? He's done it. Sometimes we forget the things that He's done, because it's easy to remember the hard times, right? Especially if we're in them right now. I want you to remember, He's done it before, He'll do it again. Amen. He will do it again. You know it. We just have to keep remembering it. I'm going to sing this song, and I want you to remember that. We'll do it again and again in your life, okay?
Walking around these walls, I thought by now they'd fall, but you have never failed me yet. Waiting for change to come, knowing the battle's won, for you never fail me.
So I'm not going to show you the whole song, but I wanted to show you this part. I just wanted to show you guys what I did for a living, and I wanted to show you, I know this is going to sound so cocky, but the level at which I did it at. Not that I was so good or anything, but the level at which I performed at. And you see that guy in the background right there, the red guitar, that is Brent. And he's one of my closest dudes, and he's a big part of the story too. And so, but I wanted to show you what I did here. This is fun.
He has never failed you, and you know it. You have been set free so many times. Do you agree? So many times.
Get ready.
We're gonna sing tonight. We're gonna lift Him up today. With all of your heart, with all your voice. Come on. I see you now. You know the night.
All right, it's one of my favorite songs of all time. So that is what I did for a living. For close to 7 years, I was a worship pastor in the non-denominational church in Canada. In multiple churches, I was a worship pastor. I was also a creative pastor, meaning I did a lot of video production, graphic design, website creation. So basically anything creative, I was the pastor for that. But every Sunday morning, this is what I did. And I was very passionate about it. I was very good at it. And my wife was really good at it too. She led worship as well. Being a worship pastor was like my identity for so long, and you get wrapped up in it and you have to immerse yourself in this culture 100%. It was everything. And so what I want to do is kind of take my story, and I'm going to actually take this to another platform after you guys hear it here. I'm going to take it to a platform, and I'm going to call it the Burnt Out Pastor. And I'm going to reach out to other pastors and have a safe space for pastors and ministry professionals to come on and talk about their experiences, their tough experiences. Because what I'm about to tell you guys doesn't get talked about a lot. What I'm about to tell you is going to make me lose some friends. It could potentially lead to a lawsuit through the church. What I'm about to tell you is really hard to tell you, because a lot of people believe what I'm about to tell you is I shouldn't be telling it to you. People think you should never bash the church. You should never talk down. You should never say things against the church. And it's been bred into people, and people who were raised in church to just, the church is infallible. It's never wrong, and blah, 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 blah. I'm about to shut that argument down. Today's modern non-denominational church, these types of churches, for the most part, are getting it absolutely wrong. And so before I tell you why, I'm going to tell you my story. And my story does go back to my childhood. You guys have heard me say a lot of things like I grew up poor, I grew up abandoned, I grew up in a broken home and all this stuff. And all that is absolutely true. And so I was born way back in the day in a place called Hamilton, Ontario. Okay, I know I'm going back to the beginning, but I have to. I cannot do this story justice unless I tell you about my life, my story. Does that make sense? And so basically I grew up with a single mom, not knowing my father. My mom was remarried when I was 8 years old, and between the ages of 8 and 12, I actually had a normal-ish childhood until something deeply disturbing happened in our family. That happened with my stepfather and my sister. And he ended up in prison for it, and I'm not going to get into detail. It's not my story to tell. But basically, it shaped our lives for the next foreseeable future. We ended up now, after the divorce and him going to prison, we ended up poor. We ended up getting kicked out of our apartment and our place. And then my mother and I, and my sister, until she was pregnant at 15, she moved away. It was just my mother and I moved close to 25 times from the point that I was 12 until I moved out when I was 17 years old. But you have to understand a story. When I was 12 years old, okay, we lived in this really beautiful place called Beamsville, Ontario. And I love this place with all my heart. I love Beamsville. But there was this red van that would drive around on Sunday mornings and pick up kids and bring them to church. It was an outreach ministry that this church had. And this van had an I Love Pakistan sticker on it. I don't know why I remember that. I have a worse memory for things, but it had that sticker. It was this big red 15-passenger van. These two old people, who I thought were married, would drive around and pick us up. That was their ministry. And you do Bible drills, like you hold your Bible in your hand, you open it, and if you got the scripture, you'd get a candy or whatever. It ended up being that these two were brother and sister, and they lived together their whole life. I don't think that's such a weird story. It's a little bit of a weird story. But that being said, if I hadn't have gotten on that bus when I was 12 years old, my life would be completely different than it is today. Going to church, I believe, and becoming a Christian and a believer in Jesus saved my life. My sister went a different path. Okay, my mom went a different path. Everybody in my family has gone down different paths than I did. Alcoholism, drug abuse, abandonment, major issues. I watched my mom try to attempt suicide in front of me. She tried to jump off a balcony. I had to hold her back from jumping off this balcony. And I've never forgotten that moment. There's so many moments in my childhood where there was so much trauma that I'm pretty sure I've forgotten a lot of it. But there are moments in my life growing up that I can't believe I survived. I can't believe I just didn't seek out somewhere else to go or get killed or abandoned or kidnapped or whatever. One point we had literally a drug lord living at our house because we couldn't pay our rent. And my mom was hanging around all these bikers. And this was like a moment in her life that she's not very proud of. My mom has passed away, by the way. And she can't, she's told me I can tell her story. My mom and I have reconciled since, so this is a whole other story that we'll tell you another day. But anyway, my mom was hanging around the wrong type of people when she went down this crazy rabbit hole. She blamed herself for what happened to my sister and all this crap that went down, and so she just went off the rails. She would leave me alone for like 3 weeks at a time when I was like 13. She would hang out with bikers, and at one point we had a drug lord stay at our house, living at our house paying rent because we couldn't pay rent. And these are the type of people that were around me. But because I got on that bus to go to church, I was introduced to a new type of person, to a new type of mentor. And I had a youth pastor, and his name was Steve, and to this day, an amazing dude who shaped the way that I kind of look at the world, these youth pastors. And that's good and bad. And I'm going to get to that maybe in the next episode. But pastors can have a massive, major influence on people's lives. And so that's why it's so important to talk about this. Because pastors, in my case, a pastor literally shaped my theology. Okay? And if you don't know anything about theology, that's okay. We're not going to get into all that. We'll get into a little bit of it, but I'm just going to tell you what I believe. Anyway, so because of all this craziness in my life, we were very poor. I was bullied relentlessly in school. I didn't have any support. I didn't understand anything. I gained a ton of weight after my parents got divorced because there was nobody watching me, telling me what to do, and I just went off the rails. Like I had no impulse control. I was actually skinny when I was young, and then I got really fat, and I just became it just kind of snowballed into worse scenarios. Anyway, I grew up in this church from 12 years old until the point we moved away. And when we moved away, I didn't actually end up going to church for another few more years, and I found myself back at another church because when you're poor in these communities, churches tend to be the place where you gravitate. I'm not sure if that's the case anymore. That or, the 7-Eleven parking lot where you just hang out. So I ended up going to church, and church was amazing for me. It was an escape from everyday reality. It was escape from the abandonment. It was escape from never having food. My youth pastor sometimes would buy me clothes for school. It was just a place where I felt safe. I never wanted to go home. And so church was my getaway. It was my place to be. And I remember moving out to New Brunswick. If you don't know where that is, it's in the east coast of Canada. And starting to go to church again after we had moved a bunch of times and getting plugged back in and finding friends and all that stuff. And another youth pastor started to shape who I was becoming. And the man, he wanted me to be a leader. He saw that I was a leader of other people and said, look, I want to harness that and teach you how to be a leader. And so that was another pastor who shaped who I was. And I'm saying all this to tell you because I just want to tell you my story. And so church was basically who I defined. I was a Christian and I went to church, and it was what defined me. And before church, I would hang out with kids that would break the law, breaking and entering. We lit a house on fire once, like a house that was almost being finished built. We had lit it on fire. I don't know if I get in trouble for that, but like we were bad kids. Okay, church took me away from that environment because my mom didn't care. She didn't even know what I was doing. And if I would have stayed on that path, I literally would have ended up in jail or dead because I was hanging around the wrong people. So church took me out of that, and that is a good thing. If nothing ever happened in my life except for the fact that I didn't go to jail or get killed because church, that is a good thing. The church did a great thing. But looking back on that church, I realized that it was a fundamental church. And to understand fundamental religion, you have to look at it from the fringes, okay? So I sit politically generally right down the center. I lean a little bit conservative in some areas, I lean a little bit liberal in other areas. Religious fundamentalists live in the fringes of fundamental Christianity or fundamental religion or whatever they do. And so a lot of that means is like rules. You have to follow all the rules. Okay, if you don't follow the rules, you're a sinner. You don't follow the rules, you're not going to heaven. You don't follow the rules, this and this. It's all about rules. It's nothing to do with relationship. And that is what I grew up on. Listening to hymns only. If you play drums in church, it's a sin. If you listen to rock music, it's a sin. Blah. All of these things that, if you drank, it's a sin. If you smoke, it's a sin. Everything's a sin. Nothing is ever like, enjoy your life. Not to say that all those things is how you enjoy your life, but it was all about what you couldn't do, never about what you really could do. So by the time I was 17, I left my house. I decided I was going to go back to Beamsville from New Brunswick, and I started going back to church. And I literally We were at church 3 times a week, Sundays, twice on Sundays, and then youth group, and then we would go to retreats and camps and everything else. I loved going on like these all-night youth retreats because I loved meeting girls. That's why I went to youth camp. It was awesome. I loved youth group because it was social, and I had met my first love there, and like it was crazy stories that I had, and like it was some of my favorite memories growing up ever was being in church and the people that I hung out with, driving around with my buddies, living in Niagara region, and I was living on my own. I got my own apartment when I was 17. So I went back to that church when I went back, and so I have always been shaped by a fundamentalist rhetoric church, and so that's what I knew. So by the time I was 17, 18, 19, I was living my own, and I decided, okay, it's time to make a decision where I'm going to go to school. And at that time, I was living with my best friend, Brandon, who's now a doctor, very successful, awesome dude. And so this is the thing about church, too, that I love so much, is that so many people were willing to take me in. I was basically an orphan. I was basically on my own, and there were so many people that were willing to help me. And that's the only reason I survived today was because people of the church helped me selflessly, okay? At one point, I was homeless for about 3 days, and I was living in the church basement. It's a whole other story. And then my friend Jen, who I love, her family took me in. I've been bounced around so many times when I was a youth, okay? It was a really, really hard upbringing. But the church was always central, and the people that helped me were always from the church. And so I always viewed church as like, that's my safe space, my place to go. Okay, I say all that to say, it was time to go to university. And where am I going to go? I'm going to go where my buddy Brandon went. And we both went to what's called Redeemer University, which is in Ancaster, Ontario. And it was the most expensive private Christian university you could go to, who basically accepts anybody. I don't even remember if I had a transcript, but I got into the school and I majored in psychology and art because I love to draw. If you look at the channel below in my videos, you'll see me. There's a video of me drawing. I hadn't drawn in years, but I still love it. And so I wanted to be an animator. And so I went to school for art, which was stupid. Don't go to a Bible college for art. Dumb. Anyway, but I don't regret that year. Even though I spent 20 grand to go to that school for 1 year, it shaped who I would become for the next 10 plus years. I was this guy who grew up bullied. I was poor, and not a lot of people liked me. I was really annoying. I was just hard to be around sometimes. I was stubborn. I was just one of those kids that like everybody hated. And it was really hard, because I just didn't know how to be someone different. Anyway, when I went to university, I decided that I was going to be someone completely different. It was time for the new Josh. And I was going to do everything in my power to be someone else, a person that people liked, wanted to be around, wanted to date, wanted to just hang out with and be friends with, because I didn't really have any super tight friends except for a few, right? And I never had problem making friends, but I just really wanted to be someone different. And part of me was because I really had a crush on this one girl who I'd had a crush on since I was like 16, okay? Like maybe 13, like a very long time. And I'm like, this girl was like my dream girl, and I'm going to be someone completely different now. I think that there was drama leading. There's always this youth group drama with dating. I think what happened was she wouldn't date me or something. We didn't get together or something happened. We had a falling out, and I went to school and I didn't speak to her for the whole year. And that's unheard of because all of us were very close, and I didn't speak to anybody for a whole year. Anyway, I went to school, this Bible college, and I took, fundamental of biblical principles. I took psychology, I took religion, I took all this stuff, and I was immersed in this culture. But I was a fundamentalist, and I went to a Christian Dutch university. But here's the thing you gotta know about Dutch people is they love to smoke, they love to drink, and they love to swear. And I'm like, what the heck? But the Christian, they're like through and through would tell you they love Jesus. And so it was a really big struggle for me, but it shaped kind of like, okay, maybe you don't have to be a fundamentalist anymore. I started thinking outside the box, so to speak, about being a Christian and what it really meant to me. And I was a church bouncer a lot. I went to every different church. I tried every different type of church. The people that would, be like, and speak in tongues. And if you didn't speak in tongues, you weren't really Christian. I went to churches that were super fundamental on one end that were like, organ hymns and like sit there and cover your head and women don't speak and women blah, blah, blah. And then I went to other churches that were so crazily like fundamentalist, like crazy, that I was like felt uncomfortable. I went to every single church you could imagine. Every single one of them. And nothing felt like home. Never. But I went because my buddies and I went. We all were looking for girls. That's why we went to church a lot of times. That all to say, I did love Jesus, and I was a Christian. I did believe that I was. Okay, and I to this day still believe that. After that year of university, I was a changed person. I was completely different. I was then someone people like to be around. I had the opportunity to start fresh and be someone completely new, and I totally did it. And I'm so glad I did. It shaped who I was for like the next 10 years of my life. And so I went home. I eventually dated that girl that that was like way out of my league and I was in love with for like when I was 13 years old. It was like the best summer of love. You know those movies of summers of loves? Like the coming of age movies, Summer of Love? I hope that everybody, that you all had a chance to experience something like that. And if you haven't, I'm so sad for you. Summers of love are the most important adolescent things a lot of kids can go through. One of the most important life things you can go through. Obviously didn't end up very well. And I mean, I think her dad made us break up because he didn't like me. And it was just an insane story. It was very much like, what's that movie? Jeff did the video about it. Oh my goodness. Sparks movie. I don't know. Anyway, that one where their parents kind of tricked her into breaking up with him. Anyway, I was heartbroken. I was literally destroyed. And the reason I stopped going to that church is because her dad was like an elder in that church. I'm like, I'm not coming to this church anymore because he treated me like this and he did this to me. And that's the reason I left. Isn't that crazy? So I had this great, amazing summer of love and it was like this most incredible memories of my life. And then he made us break up and I left church because he was a leader in this church and this is how he wanted to treat me. I was always kind of an outcast too. So if you grow up in a church, there's always what I like to call legacy kids. There are kids who grew up in church who are basically like royalty or whatever. I call them legacies because they are legacy children. They're literally born and bred in this church. I was never a legacy kid because nobody in my family went to church. Nobody knew my parents. Nobody knew my sister. Nobody knew anything about me except that I went. And so I was kind of just like a leech a lot of times, right? And that's how they saw me. And it was kind of sad. And if you get a chance to never treat a kid that way, please don't. I'm always going to be, and that's why I think I'm really drawn to people who feel like they're outcasts. And I'm just magnetically drawn to those people. And I want to be their friends and I want to take them under my arm and I want to hug them and like be friends and like bring them around with me and win the lottery and buy them houses. That's kind of the person I am because I was that person. And so church, one of the worst things about being in a fundamentalist church or any kind of church, especially as a person who is kind of like an outcast or like a misfit toy, is that you are treated that way. You're like, oh, it's him, but it's no one really, you were just not a legacy. And so that was one thing I noticed growing up, that if you're not a legacy kid in these churches, you're kind of like, eh. And I'm going to talk about that in a future episode. Should we be raising our kids in churches? Should we be forcing them to go to church? And that's going to be a hard topic for a lot of you to hear because I'll tell you why, because I'm pro and con against it. And there's pros and there's cons for it. So anyway, first year university is under the belt. I'm not going back there. I can't afford it. I'm broke. No one has taught me how to use money. I've been living on my own since I was 17 years old. I have so much student debt at this point that I don't even know what I'm going to do with my life. I become a landscaper back home in the summer of love, and it was an amazing experience for me. And then when that was all over, I decided, oh my gosh, I got to get out of this town. And I went to another Bible college out in Saskatchewan. Okay, if you never heard of a place called Moose Jaw, I lived about 30 minutes from this Moose Jaw in a place called Cairnport, and I went to a school called Briarcrest Bible College. And it was like, when I went, it was still kind of fundy. It was still kind of like, girls and guys aren't allowed in each other's dorms. You're not allowed to have tattoos. No, I had my tongue pierced. I had my labret pierced. I had my this pierced. I had like pink hair, and I had to get it all changed. I said, you have to take your piercings out. You have to bring your hair back. They wouldn't let you do all that stuff. I think you can do it now, but I went to a place that was like, no, you're not doing any of that. And like, I would never send my kids to a Bible college. Not gonna lie. If they want to go, I'll be like, sure, go ahead. But I would never send my kids to Bible college. It's so expensive first. Second, you live in a giant bubble and you just become like super hyper aware of what everybody else is doing around you. And you become a super judgmental douchebag a lot of the times, not all the time. So I have to go back to my first year at Redeemer. My first year at Redeemer sparked my love for music. So I picked up this guitar because I wanted to impress that girl that I was telling you about. I remember hearing her one day sing at youth group. I wish I like had a guy that like played guitar. And I'm like, oh really? Yeah, sounds cool. And then I literally picked up the guitar and started learning how to play guitar. That's what happened. When I went to Redeemer, my first year, I played guitar 3 hours a day. Because remember, when I went to that school, I was kind of leaving this town where I was rejected. Not from the church, from her, from everybody else. And I'm like, I'm going to show them. I'm going to become someone. I'm a rock star. I'm going to do whatever. And I started playing guitar, and it just became, my love for music was sparked from that. And so all this stuff comes back to where it was at the church. My love for music was sparked there. Everything was sparked there. And I started playing music and whatever. I went to Briarcrest, and I started studying worship leadership and music, recording engineering and development, that kind of music became my life. I remember that first year, we had a band and we did a little tour, and I'm hooked forever. And so after that school year, I decided I'm done with school. I got my certificate of worship leadership. I'm moving on. And I moved out to Ottawa, which is a capital of Canada, if you didn't know. And it's a very cold city with terrible traffic. And I just lived there for a while. I went to church. And that's where I met my wife, Kathy. And so I was a worship leader, a volunteer worship leader for a large youth group in the city. It's called the Metropolitan Bible Church, by the way. It's the biggest church in the city. But it was, again, a fundamentalist church. And I can't believe I kept going back to these places. And so my first real bad experience happened at this church. I was immersed in this church. Like, I was hanging with girls, I was leading worship, I was going to the camps, I was volunteering, I was doing whatever I could, right? And then I took a part-time job at this church. And then I started realizing how the sausage is made at church. Here's the issue, and here's what we're going to talk about in the next episode, because we're already at 30 minutes. I'm sorry. You do not want to see how the sausage is made at churches. Okay? And that says a lot about the state of church. And I'll just kind of leave it there. But basically, I was a part-timer here because I wasn't making a lot of money, and they gave me a part-time job, and they fired me because the pastor's son needed a job, and they gave him my job. And I threatened to sue them and everything, and then they gave me severance, and I knew they were wrong because they gave me severance from a part-time job. And so I was really pissed off about that, and I was like, that was my first big hit from a church. I was like, oh my gosh. Every church at some level hurts people to some degree at some level, right? And I didn't do anything wrong at this place. I've never been fired from a job, by the way, ever before. And so I was always a hard worker, and I always did what I was supposed to do, but I was let go because the pastor's kid, the legacy kid, needed a job. So that was really hard for me, really, really difficult. And then I stopped going to church for a long time. I was like, I'm done with church. I'm finished. I'm just so sick of it. But what I didn't realize was that I was sick. I was done with fundamentalist church. I was done with these old school, traditional style churches who just focused on rules and just didn't they just did it wrong. They just were, and their music sucked. And I was beginning to go into music. And so basically what I did then was I started a Christian rock band called Hearts in Stereo. And we played churches all over Ontario and Canada and the East Coast, and we toured, and we were I'm not saying we were famous, but we were a pretty big band in this area. Like, you could go to any church and they heard of us, and we'd bring hundreds of kids out to these events, and we would sell shirts, and we were a Christian band, and we would do worship music, and we would also do rock music, and we would be our whole job was to be cool Christians so that kids thought Christians were cool. That was it was so stupid. We were like a metal band, pop craziness, and it was fun. It was like my glory days, and I don't regret it at all. And it was the most amazing time of my life. So after the band started getting pretty big and everything else, and then we went on this tour, the first level of the band decided, we're not going to go forward. This is too much work. We're not making enough money. We can't continue forward. And so I got a new lineup of guys to do the band, and then I was really trying to pursue the pop side of music and everything else and understanding the culture and all that. And then that didn't really work out either because my daughter was born. And if you know me, and you guys sort of know me, I'm a family man through and through, and the most important thing to me is my family. And so as soon as Everly was born, no more touring. Band was pretty much done. Everybody else started to have kids, and then we just decided to go on our own ways. But that is the moment in my life where I decided I'm going to be a worship pastor. I had all these connections to all these pastors from all these churches we played at, and they're all like, why are you not a worship pastor? You're so good at this, blah, blah, blah. And the seed had always been planted in my head. And so I then decided it was going to become a worship pastor. And I took this job locally, and I said, I'm going to give you guys 2 years. I'm going to learn how to do all this. And they took me to this church called North Point in Atlanta, Georgia. North Point is if you're immersed in ministry and you want to see how churches do it, North Point's like the Google of if you work at a small high-tech firm, but Google, and you want to work at Google, North Point is the Google, okay? I think the year I went, their annual budget was something like $36 million. That's how much they brought in on the offering plate. But they were doing ministry like I had never seen it before. I'm like, what is this? There's giant screens, there's rock bands, there's musical production that would blow your mind, okay? $250,000 sound system, stage with lights and backdrops and all this incredible things. This pastor named Andy Stanley who could just give you a message that would just resonate with you, and you're like, what is this? And the pastor that was going to hire me said, this is what we want to do here. And I'm like, if this is the kind of church that you want to do, I'm in. Let's do this. And that sparked my drive to become a worship pastor and a pastor at a church that was for the unchurched. And what I don't realize until kind of now-ish in my life was that that was my path towards post-Christianity. towards this new movement of being a Christian, which is less about tradition and laws and all the stuff in the old, but still believing the Bible, but more about just loving people and just trying to do whatever you could to get a butt in that seat at church, to come to this meeting, come to this message, come hear this music, and be a part of this culture. That's what it was. And I was sold, 100% sold on North Point's level of the way that they were doing ministry. And to this day, I still love going to North Point. If I'm in Atlanta, I'm going to North Point. If you guys have never heard of this church, or if you're in Atlanta, go check it out. I dare you. It is so addictive, this style of church, okay? Because it's not like church at all. Like, you're just going to be blown away by the level of the magnitude of the skills of the worship team and the tech team. It's like these people could tour with you too if they wanted to. It's insane how good they are. And if you're in ministry like I was, and all these other people came to this conference to learn how they did it, you're literally filling this place up with 4,000 people who want to learn how you do church because you're going to take it back. It's almost like franchising. You want to bring it back to your church and do what they're doing. And so I was sold out. I was pumped. I started doing the music like that, wearing the skinny jeans, like just crazy. I was doing everything. I had the in-ears. I was using tracks, and it was playing it like just everything. The song I showed you at the beginning, that was to tracks. But I had a really, really tight band, so that really helps. And I was starting to develop, because I was already a musician. I was already touring with a band, and I already knew how the logistics of bands and tech went, all that stuff. And so I knew how to do video and production and graphics, web design. And so these churches will hire guys like me, who are like unicorns, basically, who can do everything. And they literally work you to the bone, because they just can't. Small churches really can't afford people that do what I do, and that's kind of sucks. We're gonna get to that in another thing, but this is leading up to a story that I'm gonna then continue tomorrow night, because this is already too long, and I know you guys are probably just shutting her down. But anyway, so I was sold out for this style of church, and I'm going hard. Let's do this. I'm sold out. And so I served at this church for 2 years, and it grew, and we did the music the way I wanted to. We brought the in-ears in, we did all the tech, we did everything, all the things that everybody was doing at North Point, and I copied it. And then I said, okay, it's time for me to take the step to the next level. And I said, it's been 2 years, 2.5 years, it's time for me to move on to something bigger. Because they basically couldn't afford, like, I creatively grew out of their budget. Does that make sense? I wanted to do the big stuff. And I wanted to have a platform where if I had more, I could bring more. And boy, was I mistaken, but that's not till later. More doesn't mean more at all. Those churches who do that kind of thing, that bring people in, they basically just bring people from other churches who are abandoning smaller churches. And that's a narrative for another day. But I'm just saying, I didn't care. I was like, let's do this. I want to be at the big church. So I started looking at jobs, and I almost took a job in Texas, at Fort Worth, which I love Texas, by the way. I almost took a job in California. Then I looked at the real estate prices, said, no, sorry, I don't want to live in a sewer. So sorry, I don't want to live on top of 7-Eleven with my family. And then I almost took a job in Florida, North Carolina. Like the churches in the U.S., so many people are hiring, and they pay you a lot of money. Okay, don't get it twisted. Don't ever hear a pastor of a megachurch or these big churches say that they're making no money. They're making money. A lot of these churches start you at $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 a year. Okay, no joke. If you're on the level that I'm on. Now, I say that without trying to sound cocky, but I was a unicorn. Basically, I could do everything: tech, music, video, graphics, websites, social media, everything. I could do it all on a very high level, which is what I do now anyway for a living, because I'm good at it, and I poured my life into that, because being in a band, I had to learn all those things, and I just taught myself. And so I just, like anything, I just poured my time and effort into that, and I became good at it. Like anything, if you practice, you'll be good, right? Anyway, so I was being headhunted by a lot of churches. People were reaching out to me saying, we'd like to interview you, hire you, bring you down for interviews, blah, 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 flying everywhere. It was just crazy. And it definitely gives you a big head. And you're like, oh, I'm good. And so I get to pick and choose where I want to go. And it's not an attitude a pastor should have, by the way. So then my wife said, look, we're not moving to the States. I don't want to move to Texas. We don't like guns. Or she doesn't. I like guns. But my wife didn't want to move too far away. She's really close to her family, and that seemed really hard for her. And so we moved down here to where I am today. And it's Southern Ontario, and I don't really want to give it away because it's not, I don't know. It's just, I did this interview. I interviewed at this church, and it took me 6 months to get this job. There were so many like disc profile tests I had to take and come down and audition and do all these things to get into this church, to get into the place where I really wanted to be. This was like the place where you made it. This is a mega church. It's a place with a good budget, lots of people that go there on Sunday morning, like 2,500 on a Sunday morning, like a big, big place, right? With like huge kids playground and like pastors and everybody's got a job to do, blah, 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 blah. And I was sold out, and I was like getting right. And ministry was my life. All those people out there who reach out to me who've had husbands who've left ministry, you know what it's like, especially as a pastor's wife, to move your kids around, to move people around. So I uprooted my entire family from Ottawa and I moved down here. And that's why I'm here today. Then everything changed. And one day I went in and I was fired. And I'm going to get into that tomorrow. Like and subscribe. It's going to get crazy, because that is going to be another crazy story that you're not going to want to miss. And it's basically the reason why I've become who I am today. And it has shaped my faith and has transformed my faith. And it has made me an advocate for no church. And we're going to get into that. It's made me an advocate for like what real church could be. It's made me an advocate for fake people and for mega pastors and all this whole world of Christian music and worship music and everything else. I'm going to dive into it. And you're not going to like what I have to hear if you go to these places. And that's okay, but I need you to hear it. I want to become a safe place for pastors to come talk about their stories. Because what happened to me was insane. And it was heartbreaking for my family. It destroyed me. It brought me, it was just an insane thing that happened. And what happened to me has happened to so many pastors and is happening to this day. And there are so many pastors that are still sitting in their highest levels, in the highest echelons of leadership, that should not be sitting there. There is too much going on in the westernized church right now that is wrong. And I definitely want to be an advocate for change. And so I'm not scared anymore to talk about this. Again, I'm going to go back to the beginning. I'm going to lose friends. I'm definitely going to have people reach out to me and throw some hate comments down there. Bring it on. Because unless you've lived this life as a pastor, you have no idea. And I'm gonna show you the ins and outs and how the sausage is made in ministry, and you guys are going to be like, what? And we're going to talk about how we can fix it. So let me know in the comments below what you think so far. That is my story up to this point. But when I get into when I continue into the story, that's when it really, really gets hard and where the rubber hits the road. And for a lot of you, if you know pastors who have been burned out or have left and fired, pushed out, whatever, can you tell them to reach out to me? Because I'm definitely starting a channel. It's called The Burnt Out Pastor. And I really want to keep diving into this type of topic and be a safe place and commentary for the church as it is today, because it's actually the worst it's ever been. I'm going to say that out loud. Modern day non-denominational churches and most churches in the Western culture today are all getting it wrong. They're some of the most fake places that you could ever be. And there's just some craziness going on. We're talking non-disclosure agreements and sexual abuse and everything else going on, and celebrity pastors and money and everything else. It's just gross and grimy, and we're going to talk about it. All right? Like and subscribe. Or don't, but I'd like you to, because it's going to get crazy. Let's talk.